My name is Jackie, and I'm with Leadership and Life by KREC Inc., and I'm here today to talk about team building. And I think if you think back to team building, some of us who are maybe of my age might kind of roll their eyes and like, oh my God, like just kill me now. And it brings back memories of trust falls and sharing most embarrassing moments and key pivotal memories and stuff like that. And I just want to talk about what team building really can be and what it should be, because it's not what we might envision from our past. I think we go back to the 90s and we're like, those of us who grew up during that time period, we're thinking about trust building and team building, and we're like, oh man, I don't really want to do that thing. So I think there's elements to team building that we need to understand. And we go back to Patrick Lencioni's The Five Dysfunctions of a Team and that base layer of trust. And how do you build trust? And Lencioni says trust is built through vulnerability-based trust, right? And so you need to be able to admit that you're wrong, ask for help, admit you don't know, own up to mistakes. And that is all a big element of that trust. And so how do we do that? And we kind of go back to our history of how do we build trust? And it's like, well, let's go axe throwing. And axe throwing is maybe a really great task. It's a really great activity for us to do, and we can kind of build that conversation and we can get to know each other. But it doesn't build that deeper layer of trust. I think some of us, I'm not saying it's not fun, I'm just saying that it might not have as far-reaching effects as we might think it does. I think going out with your team, spending time over breaking ground over food is always really important. I think that food really helps us break down a lot of barriers. So that is all really valuable the stuff to do. That builds team, that builds because it helps me understand you, right? At the basis of those kinds of activities, it's learning a little bit more about you and understanding you. And this is where I think a lot of traditional team building really falls down. So when we go back to that whole, like, let's all share our most embarrassing moments and then do trust falls. Well, I have to trust you to catch me, and I don't yet. And the act of falling and you catching me kind of puts it into reverse, because I need to have that trust first. But the model sort of says, well, that's going to create the trust. And so it's sort of this chicken and egg thing. And I think there's some challenges around that. First of all, is that anyone I've talked to doesn't want to do trust falls. I don't want to share my most embarrassing moment because I don't know you well enough yet, maybe, to say, I don't trust that you're going to hold this against me, that you're not going to make fun of me. And so you have to have that base layer of trust in order to share that vulnerability. And so how do you do that? We also know, I read a really good book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and we know that emotional intelligence is critical now to success. And that where it used to be IQ, it isn't anymore, because we have the world at our fingertips. We have all the knowledge we could need. Like, we can Google search anything, right? I was watching TV the other day and I'm like, oh, I wonder where I've seen that actor before. And I didn't have to rack my brain. I searched it up. IMDb comes up. I'm like, yeah, okay, got it. Boom, now I recognize her. So because we can look up everything, we've moved to a new kind of, I think, era in leadership, and that is one of emotional intelligence. And there are tons and tons of studies out there that show us that emotional intelligence contributes to success. And there was one study that it showed, I'm on page 21 of Emotional Intelligence 2.0. So look there. I can't do this. There we go. And it just says, of all the people we studied at work, we found that 90% of high performers are also high in EQ. On the flip side, just 20% of low performers are high in EQ. So it becomes really important for us to tap into this understanding of ourselves and how we show up. The bigger challenge is, how do you do that? How do you improve your emotional intelligence? And how do you learn more about yourself without going to therapy or anything like that? And this is where I think DISC gives us great insight. So when you complete a DISC assessment, you get an individual report. It's 33 pages of goodness. It's a little overwhelming, but it tells you things like how do other people see you? And you can look at those words and say, is this how I see myself? Is there congruence in this, or are there things that I don't agree with? And it's a computer generated assessment. It's not going to be 100%, and that is okay. But when I look at mine, it says follows instructions. I'm like, well, I'll follow the instructions if I think that they're good. If I think that they're ridiculous, I don't. So that's really good to know. Um, Patience. I don't view myself as a really patient person, but when I've gone through an exercise around this, other people do. So that's really good to know about myself and how I show up for other people. A DISC assessment report also tells me about what my strengths are. And tenacity is in there, and persistence and building team, that's all in there. It tells me about what reduces my motivation, things like conflict and instability. So I understand when I am going through times like now, when I am building a business, that it is unstable and I can't predict the future and I don't know what work is coming, that is going to produce angst inside of me. So when I feel that angst, I can understand it, I can name it to tame it, and then I don't actually go and take that out on other people, which is a huge part of emotional intelligence. I think we think about people who aren't emotionally intelligent and they just sort of erupt because they can't control it. They don't recognize it, and they can't then control their emotions. And so, as all our impulses come up and focus through, come into the brain, they have to go through our emotional part of our brain before they hit the rational part of our brain. So we have to really understand emotion in order to be emotional intelligent, right? My report also tells me about how I show up when I'm under pressure. So it talks about I'm going to procrastinate making decisions. I'm going to get caught in a cycle of I don't know and digging in, and I'm going to be slow to make decisions. So that's all really, really good information for me to understand myself. And in that report as well, it talks about all four of the styles, the D, I, S, and C, which I've talked a lot about, and there's tons of videos that I can share with you that I've talked about and blog posts. When I understand the DISC style of other people on my team, other people that I'm working with, I can adjust my style to meet their needs. And my DISC assessment report gives me specific ideas about how I can do that for each of the four styles. And that advice, those ideas are tailored to my style and how I answered that assessment. And so it is really quite specific. So for me as an individual, it is a phenomenal resource for me to understand myself, to be able to use this to understand how others see me and how to interact with others, which all improves my emotional intelligence. As a team, when we all look at our DISC styles and we can overlay them over top of each other, we can understand the strengths and blind spots of our team. And I can understand that the D style is going to interrupt me, and I can understand that that's just sort of how it's in the head and out the mouth, and that it's not a condemnation of what I am saying. They aren't judging me. They just had a thought. And create that understanding helps me reduce the resentment I have about being interrupted. That when I am working with an I style, that I'm gonna have to leave lots of extra time because they can be chatty. And that's okay if I understand that. But I better be really clear. If I need a really quick, short conversation, that I either preface it with that, okay, I just need the answer to this, but let's find a time we can catch up and dig into the relationship, which is really important to them. But I can also understand that that is really hard for them. And I can set them up for success. I can set us up for success. So when we use DISC to help us create that team, we not only understand ourselves better, but we understand the people that we're working with better. And that builds the strongest layer of trust on a team, which is that basis for Lencioni's pyramid. So we can't get to results up through, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results, if we don't have that base layer of trust. And so what we can look at is, how do we build that layer of trust that is meaningful, that builds emotional intelligence in not only ourselves, but the people around us. So as a leader, we want to encourage that, because that will create a stronger team and will reduce the negative dynamics that teams might have. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it with a team who was struggling to kind of get along, and there was a lot of that grit and conflict and resentment that was happening. And when we did this DISC team report, it was like, oh, I get this about me, but I also get this about you. Wow. Okay, this is really, really cool. And so I've had really good results with this. It also doesn't involve like trust falls, most embarrassing moments, any of those things that we kind of have this like, could you just like poke my eyes out with a pin now, because I think I'd rather do that than go to a day of team building. So if we rethink about it as a way that we can learn about ourselves and learn about other people in a meaningful way, then I think it becomes not that, I say, vomit-inducing concept of team building that many of us have in our heads.